Hello, everyone. Today's topic is how to fix a tendency to overthink what Buddha taught. Do you find yourself constantly fretting? What if I mess this up? What if they hate me? Do you get told you overthink things, but still can't help but worry? Do you find you get so nervous about doing things wrongly that your nervousness itself leads you to mess it up? Then today's video is for you. In my Buddhist community, I talk about Buddhism with a variety of people, and quite a few of the ones who have been listening to Buddhism for a year or two say that since they started listening to Buddhism, they've stopped worrying so excessively. That's something I myself can relate with. Before I started listening to Buddhism, I used to worry far too much about certain things, but listening to Buddhism has brought me a lot of peace. I've definitely become able to think more methodically about things, and am far less prone to worrying and overthinking. Perhaps some of you who've been learning about the Buddhist teachings from my videos for some years feel the same way. How then can listening to Buddhism relieve anxiety and a tendency to overthink? Let us look at two aspects of the Buddhist teaching to find the answer. I hope that you too will find the Buddhist teachings help you to find relief from excessive worrying. Today I will talk about these 2 points. 1. The universe will remain the same. 2. Nothing lasts forever. Bertrand Russell was one of the 20th century's most prominent intellectuals and gave many lectures in his time. However, public speaking was actually something that made him incredibly nervous, as he said in The Conquest of Happiness. I dreaded the ordeal so much that I always hoped that I might break my leg before I had to make a speech. If he broke his leg, he'd get out of having to give a lecture. That seemed preferable to him. This was how intense his fear of public speaking was. Sometimes it really wouldn't go well for him, which might seem surprising for someone as highly esteemed as Bertrand Russell. But it goes to show that even someone of his standing can be afflicted with this kind of anxiety and mess up at times too. However, he would later change his point of view. Gradually, I taught myself to feel that it did not matter whether I spoke well or ill. The universe would remain much the same in either case. He began to tell himself that whether his speech went well or not, it wouldn't really have any significant effect on the universe. This way of thinking calmed his nerves and enabled him to give speeches without too much worry. He also said, "Our doings are not so important as we naturally suppose. Our successes and failures do not, after all, matter very much. Even if we completely botch, say, an important presentation at work in the grand scheme of things, it's not actually that big a deal." Hearing this quote from Bertrand Russell reminded me of something called the Sermon of the Starry Sky. If you're out in the countryside at night, you can see twinkling stars blanketing the night sky. Each one of those countless stars is actually much like our sun. Though they might look tiny to us, that's just because they're so far away. They too are actually huge balls of plasma that emit light, but their distance from us limits how much of their light can actually reach us. The reason why our sun looks so much bigger and brighter than they do is just that it's so close to Earth. Light travels quickly enough to be able to cross the equivalent of 7.5 times the circumference of the Earth in just a second. But the stars we see in the night sky are so far away that it can take years, decades, centuries, or even longer for their light to reach our eyes. So when we look up at the starry sky, we're seeing light that has traveled for a whole variety of mind-boggling lengths of time. Seeing the stars with this in mind really brings home the vastness of the universe. In such a boundless universe, the Earth is just one small planet amongst countless others, in just one galaxy amongst billions or trillions. Truly, we are living in just a tiny corner of the vast cosmos. When it comes to time as well, our planet is about 4.6 billion years old, with the universe being about 13.7 billion years old. Human life, by contrast, lasts only between 80 and 100 years or so. Just the blink of an eye in comparison. We've been born into a mere corner of a boundless universe, living a lifespan that pales in comparison to the history of that universe. With a life this fleeting, what exactly is it that we were born here to do? What is the purpose of our lives when our lives are over so soon? Gazing at the cosmos brings forth these kinds of questions. Truly, the cosmos itself is a living sermon from far off in eternity, hence why Buddhism refers to it as the sermon of the starry skies. I'd imagine some of you will have ended up wondering what exactly our fleeting lives are for while studying the universe or gazing up at the stars. Buddhism guides us to the very same questions that come up as we contemplate our existence in this vast universe. Buddhism teaches that our present lives are actually not the only lives that we live. Rather, we live many lifetimes. In other words, we go through birth, death again and again over the course of endless kalpas. Just one kalpa alone is 4.32 billion years, so endless kalpas is a rather mind-bendingly long time. It is also expressed as innumerable eons or kalpas as countless as particles. This is the boundlessly vast scale from which Buddhism looks at things. As Master Shinran put it, the exceedingly long history of our existence has no beginning and no end. Before reaching this present life, we had gone through the cycle of birth and death again and again, piling delusion upon delusion. Buddhism teaches that the present life, the approximately 80 to 100 years we will spend in our present physical forms, is like a bubble on the surface of a large, swiftly flowing river. It will float there on the surface for a short while before suddenly bursting into nothingness. In his masterwork teaching Practice, Faith, Enlightenment, Master Shinran said, "Even in the passage of countless kalpas, it is difficult to be saved by the power of Amida's vow and difficult to enter the great ocean of faith. Even while going through countless lifetimes since the long-distant past, Master Shinran had been unable to encounter salvation through the vow power of Amida Buddha." Elsewhere, Master Shinran compared this vow power of Amida, also known as other power, to a great ship that lifts us out of the sea of life's suffering. This sea represents the long kalpas of pain and delusion that we have been trapped in. The painful sea of birth and death knows no bounds. Long have we been submerged in its waters. Long have we been submerged in this painful sea of life, because even in the passage of countless kalpas, it is difficult to be saved by the power of Amida's vow. It is difficult to enter the great ocean of faith. This means being taken aboard the vow ship and experiencing absolute peace and joy, also known as true faith. Master Shinran rejoiced that he had now been taken aboard this ship that is so difficult to encounter even in countless kalpas. Ah, how hard it is, even in many lifetimes, to encounter the strong condition of the universal vow. How hard it is, even in myriad eons, to obtain faith that is true and real. The universal vow is Amida Buddha's vow. Master Shinran had gone through lifetime after lifetime of being unable to get aboard the vow ship, but now, at last, he had been brought aboard. At this extraordinary happening, he could not help but gasp in awe. Ah! Master Shinran had not only been longing in vain to be taken aboard the vow ship for a lifetime or two, but for countless lifetimes into the distant past. Now at last he was aboard. He was therefore filled with effervescent joy. To obtain faith that is true and real is to live in transcendent joy after finally being taken aboard the vow ship. This is to enter the great ocean of faith, also expressed as attaining absolute happiness. It is a state that is difficult to obtain, even in myriad eons. When we consider our entire existence spanning over myriad eons in this way, it becomes clear to us that our present lifetime of perhaps 80 to 100 years truly is so incredibly short. This being the case, we are indeed those with but a moment of life remaining. We are all subject to impermanence, meaning we never know what might happen or when. Most importantly to us, our very own lives are impermanent. We might be alive right now, yet die just a moment later. There's every chance we won't even live to see tomorrow. But whether the end comes for us sooner or later, death is an inevitability for us all. With death always potentially just around the corner, we are those with but a moment of life remaining. Perhaps modern medicine might enable us to live to or past 100 years, but our lives will still be just as short as the blink of an eye in comparison to the endless kalpas and many lifetimes that Buddhism takes into account. When one man contracted cancer at the age of 60, he underwent surgery to remove it. Thankfully, the surgery was successful, but he wondered, why do I have to go through this at my age? I'm not even old. Nowadays, most people expect to live into their 80s and 90s, but there's no guarantee of that. Some people will die in their 60s, others will live up to the average life expectancy, and others will get to live into their 100s. When people die at 100, the general sentiment is that they got to live a long life and were fortunate because of it. When people die in their 50s or 60s, however, their loved ones lament that they are gone too soon and that there was still so much more they could have done. Even so, from a Buddhist point of view, whether a person lives for 50 years or 100 years, a lifetime goes by as quickly as a single step. The way a Buddha sees human life is much like how a human sees the life of a cicada. After spending 7 years developing underground, the newly emerged adult cicada lives for only 7 days. To us, a 7-day life seems incredibly short. After all, we might even live for a century in comparison. Now imagine something kills a cicada on its 5th day of life, or, on the flip side, a particularly robust cicada manages to live for 9 days instead of the usual 7. Would you mourn the shortness of the life of the cicada who lived for 5 days and delight at the length of the life of the cicada who lived for 9 days? Well, probably not, because whether a cicada lives for 5 days or 7 days or 9 days, for us human beings, it still seems an incredibly short time to live. In much the same way, a Buddha, who has eternal life, would see a human life of 80 or so years as being tragically short, and adding or subtracting 20 or so years to or from that number would not really make much of a difference. Whether it lasts 60 or 80 or 100 years, human life is still over in the blink of an eye, which means we are very much those with but a moment of life remaining. So what exactly is it that we are supposed to do with such fleeting lives? What is it that we live for? For what purpose were we born into this world and given this limited time? Just what is the purpose of our lives? That is the very question that Buddhism focuses on. When we listen to Buddhism and start looking at our existence on the much wider scale that the teachings go into, we begin to see that the things we've been fretting about are actually nothing in the long run. This helps us to see that actually there's no need to get so wound up about them. Let's say we have to give an important presentation at work. Ordinarily, this would be a very nerve-wracking thing. If we mess this up, it'll make the higher ups see us negatively, and how can we succeed at our jobs then? If we do particularly badly, we might even get fired, which is a depressing thought. But if we zoom out a little and think of things from a broader perspective, even if the worst comes to worst and we do get fired, it's not as if our lives will have ended. Sure, we'll lose our income, which will bring some difficulty to our day-to-day lives. But if we stop, breathe, and think carefully, taking things step by step, we'll soon see there are ways to get through the situation. We'll need to be mindful of how much we are spending on food and other such things. Perhaps we could consider moving to a cheaper apartment where it'd be easier to pay the rent. We should also start looking at what kind of jobs are out there and thinking about how we can earn an income from here on out. Before we know it, we will have set the ball rolling to bring stability back into our lives again. And who knows, getting fired might turn out to have been a blessing in disguise. Once you find a new job, you might find it's a lot less stressful than your previous one, prompting you to wonder what all that fussing and fretting you used to do was even for. Alternatively, let's say that at work you get demoted and transferred to a different branch that you think is not as good as your previous one. Maybe you think at first that you've no prospects there whatsoever, but then the change of situation prompts you to pick up a new hobby that turns out to be really fulfilling, and you might even meet your future spouse there. After all that, you'll find yourself glad you got transferred. So in this way, things that might have seemed terrible at first can actually open up new paths for you. When you're holding tightly onto something, you feel sure that if you let it go, your life will be over, but that doesn't have to be the case. Buddhism teaches that actually, the things we rely on in life are just like logs floating on a sea of suffering. That means our jobs, our partners, our talents, our looks, and other such things are like logs. As waves of suffering come at us in this sea, we find ourselves wanting to cling to something in hopes of finding relief, so we look to floating boards or logs that we think appear to be reliable. When we wrap our arms around them, we think, "Oh, I can just relax. The waves won't bother me so much now." The thing is, however, these boards and logs aren't rooted or anchored to anything, so the moment a large wave comes along, whatever we're clinging to is easily swept out of our grasp, and we are left floundering and choking in the salty water. Then, feeling betrayed, we regret having chosen that log or board, and we seek out another one, only for the very same thing to happen eventually. This happens again and again and again throughout our lives. So in this way, the logs and boards we cling to, or the various things we rely on in life, are fragile and fleeting. Everything in this world is sure to perish at some point. That means we cannot rely on, say, our jobs forever. Even if we don't get fired, the company itself might go under. And even if neither of those things happen, we're going to be too old to work eventually, at which point we will have to leave anyway. Then we'll have to find something else with which to occupy our time. There's also the fact that sometimes losing a log or board can turn out for the better. Let's say your spouse betrays you, and it hurts so much at first. But then you find another partner and you realize this person is so much better for you than the previous person was. Although that loss was painful, it wasn't the end of the world, and you carried on and found something better in the end. Everything that we hold dear, including our health and our skills and all such things, will be swept away from us sooner or later. So in the end, all that will have happened is that something that was sure to be swept away has now been swept away. No matter how dear something might be to us, it won't be ours forever. Someday we will have to part from it. And once we die, we'll have to leave everything behind. Sakyamuni Buddha taught that upon life's sea of suffering, there is actually a great ship that will never perish. Precisely because everything in this world will perish at some point, We need to hurry to get aboard the big and perishable ship. When we're mindful of this teaching of Sakyamuni, then even when we have to suffer the pain of losing our precious logs and boards, it will remind us of how true Sakyamuni's teaching is, and we will feel all the more motivated to get aboard that ever-unperishing great ship that he spoke of. In this world, where everything perishes, pursue the truth that never perishes. Pursue this and this alone. Everything in this world, even our own bodies, is fleeting. Here today, gone tomorrow. Once we listen carefully to the Buddhist teachings and realize the impermanent nature of everything, we begin to see that all the difficulties we have to face in life are actually Amita's expedient means to guide us to the truth that never perishes. This gives us the strength to carry on and pursue that unperishing truth. So when something we relied on leaves us, we realize, it's just as Buddhism teaches. This too was bound to go away someday, and then we take it as a sign to pursue true happiness all the more. This way, no matter what we may lose in life, it's much easier for us to accept it and move on. Today we have been exploring the topic of how to fix a tendency to overthink. We went through what Buddhism teaches on this and how listening to Buddhism can make it easier to accept the things that happen to us in life. First of all, we learned that if we go by Buddhism's perspective of the universe, then whether we succeed or fail at a thing isn't actually that much of a big deal. If we keep in mind that we have a greater purpose to accomplish, then everything else is just a small matter in comparison. Secondly, we saw that even if we lose something precious to us, it's not like there aren't other, possibly better things out there for us. However much we might cherish something, it too is like a log that will be swept out of our grasp someday. That is true of everything in this world. When we keep this in mind, we can more easily accept a loss as a natural part of life, and also see it as encouragement to seek out real, lasting happiness that never perishes. So, if we're mindful of this Buddhist wisdom, we won't feel such a need to fret over potential failures or losses. We'll be much better able to keep things in perspective and calmly carry on with life, even when difficulty comes our way. This channel explores the Buddhist teachings from a variety of different angles, so if you'd like to learn more, why don't you hit that subscribe button so you'll know whenever we release a new video. Thank you for watching today's video.